Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Today I thought I would do something that's sort of more of a beginner project with just one stone in it, and I thought it might be nice to make a beginner ring. And I would say this is not a very first kind of beginner ring, but maybe after you've done 10 or 15 pieces, this would be appropriate for you. We'll be doing something where we have to actually shape the bottom of the bezel to match the curve of the band. So we'll make the bezel, and then later on when we attach it to the band, we'll do some shaping of the bottom. I picked out a 5mm moonstone cabochon that's round. It's a pretty little moonstone. I think it'll look nice in this. And we'll make a bezel for that, and then we'll make the band. And then, so I'm going to do a series of holes in the band about the same size as the stone itself. And I'm not sure if I'm going to alternate them or do them in a straight line, but either way I'm going to put a border around the hole. And I may call it a porthole ring because it reminds me of portholes. So we'll see how it turns out. Before we get started though, I need to thank some groups of people. First, my patrons over on Patreon are my core group of supporters. I have a couple of new ones. I have Deb and Steve. Thank you for signing up. I really appreciate your support. I think you'll find that it's a great group of people over there who are willing to share their knowledge and who appreciate your knowledge. So it's a nice community with a lot of really talented people. So thank you to my previous patrons as well for being who you are. I really appreciate you. My other group is my YouTube subscribers, and we passed 22,500 recently, which is amazing. I really appreciate the comments and the nice suggestions and telling me how you do things and all that kind of stuff is great. I love to hear it. And I do also appreciate the contributions, like the buy me coffees and the super thanks and the buying my merch and my ebooks. Those things all really help to keep me afloat, and so I can continue making these videos. I do appreciate that a lot. All right, well, let's get started on this project. So these are a couple of my design idea sketchbooks. This is the one I'm currently using, which has a useful chart on the back. It has wire gauge to inches to millimeters conversion table, which a lot of people overseas find handy because they don't generally use gauges. This one has fractions of an inch to decimals to millimeters, which I also find handy because I think in terms of fractions of an inch because that's how I was raised. But I'm trying to use the metric system more because it's more efficient. So get yourself one of those on the merch store. They're really useful. The biggest feature for me, though, is the dot matrix in the background. So it allows me to draw better pictures because I'm not super good at drawing. So, and the other thing is it lets me keep a record of what I've made, which has been super handy in recent times. So, all right, here's what we're going to do today. Nothing too fancy, but I think it should be a good project. So let me grab my little stone thing. Here's a little moonstone. It's not a rainbow moonstone, it's just a regular moonstone. But it'll be in the center of the ring here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some rings out of 18 gauge round wire. I thought about doing copper or brass, but I think I'm just going to do silver on this one. It might be pretty cool if you did some different metals. The other option would be to alternate them a little bit. I'm unsure which way to go, but I may for this one just do a straight one. And in the future I might try doing something like that. But either way it would be pretty cool probably. Once we have those soldered down, I probably will use my drill to just drill out the center. And then, you know, if we need to do any further removal of material, we can just use a ball burr to get rid of it. We will be putting the bezel for this stone on after the ring is round because if you put it on first and then bend it, it's going to distort the bezel really badly, and we don't want to do that. So, so we'll start off by making a bezel really fast, just the sides of the bezel, not the back, because we're just going to mount it right on this. On the piece of 22 gauge sheet, which is going to be the band itself, we're going to mount some 18 gauge wire on either edge to make borders. So when you do this, it has a tendency to create a little bit of a dome in the ring too, just because of the way it bends when you wrap it around the mandrel. I think I sized these to be about 11 if I remember right, but I guess we'll find out. I don't remember for sure when I drew it up earlier today. This is a 5mm moonstone, and so I kind of made these to be about the same size. So well, let's make a bezel and see how it goes. This is 3/16 inch fine silver bezel strip in 26 gauge, which is 0.41 millimeters thick and 4.76 millimeters tall. 18 gauge round wire, which we'll use for these portholes, is 1 millimeter tall or so, and 22 gauge sheet is about 0.66 millimeters. So I'm going to leave this tall initially because we need to have some depth to it in order to match the curve of the band. Not as much as we have here, but we'll file it down the rest of the way once we're where we want to be. We may even want to elevate it a little bit with a ring on the inside of the bezel just to lift it up a bit, but we'll see how it looks just flat. Probably will cut a hole in the bottom of this and leave a lip on there anyway so that you can get a little light through there, but we'll see. If you haven't been to my channel before, I use hard silver sheet solder for almost everything. I use a liquid flux that I dribble on with a dropper bottle. My torch is a Silversmith model. It's sort of a acetylene air torch, and so it draws in atmospheric air to mix with the gas and produces a nice hot flame. Hotter than a propane or a butane torch, but not as hot as an oxyacetylene, which pumps pure oxygen right into the flame. So oxyacetylene is sometimes a little bit more than you really need for silver, I think. For me, anyway. I will occasionally use a little bit of paste solder of different temperatures if I need to. I used to be against that, but I don't even know why I was, I guess. Just that's the way I was taught. So hard silver solder does have a little bit higher percentage of silver in it than the other one, so it does polish up a little closer to sterling. So So when I measure for a bezel like this, I always leave just a tiny bit extra for filing purposes because I'll inevitably need to file it just a skosh. Just flux this. Okay, where'd you go? Tweezers? There you are. Looks like I have a little bit of solder left over from yesterday. Now we'll do a little bit of reshaping. Kind of gently pinch out the big corners and then smooth it out the rest of the way. You can use a jump ring mandrel or a bezel mandrel if you want. There we go, now we're snug. Okay, so I'm going to file the top and bottom just a skosh. I wonder how many words there are for just a little bit, like skosh or tad or smidgen or wee bit or iota. Indeterminate units. Okay, I'm going to set him off to the side for a moment. Let's compare this ring I made to the size of the... That's pretty darn close to the same exact size as the outside of the bezel, so that'll work okay. And the way I made those was, let's see, I wrapped it around. This is a bail making pliers. I think that one right there. So when we get to that stage, we'll wrap a few rings around this to solder down. But let's cut a piece of the 22 gauge sheet next. So let's set these guys over here for now. You can just use this for the length here since I kind of sketched it out to scale. If you're curious, this one ended up being about 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 68 millimeters, 6.8 centimeters. And it's about 12 millimeters wide, if I recall. So let's scribe a line down here. About the right width is that. But I'm going to add a little bit, just because I don't want to have to balance this 18 gauge right on the very edge of the piece. So I'm going to give myself a little fudge room. So like, just a little bit like that. And then we can align it up without having it drop off the edge when we're soldering it down. Having some kind of little square like this is useful, more than you'd think. Okay. 22 is thin enough where I can just cut it with the shears. And I don't have any weird inside curves or anything, so I think we'll be fine without having to saw on this one. Probably could go with thinner sheet than this if you wanted to. Like this is 22, you could probably do 24 if you wanted to. I'd love to have a little bit of all different sizes, but usually by the time I get to the end of my shopping list anymore, I've already used up my budget. And to start with, let's solder down our two border pieces. Kind of going to mark where the edge should be, so I can put the wire right along that line there. Okay, so let's cut some 18 gauge and spend some time getting it nice and straight. Some people roll this between two blocks of something hard, like a bench block or pieces of hardwood. I just kind of like to straighten them by hand, personally. You should do whatever makes you happy. I'm going to cut them long enough to hang off either end. When I'm straightening stuff, I find it's easiest if I hold it with the pliers and use my fingers to do most of the work. One way you can tell whether a piece of round wire is pretty straight is how well does it roll on the table. You can see the wobbles when you move it like this. So I still have a little more work to do here. If you're bending with the pliers, you have a tendency to make too sharp a bends. Getting curves the way you want them, or wire straight, is one of those things that gets easier with practice. So don't get too down on yourself if it takes a while to get something shaped the way you want. And with wire as thin as this, if you need to cut a new piece, it's not super expensive if you get a little bit overzealous. I like to do it so we don't get a lot of bleed off onto the sheet from the solder. So we're going to pre-melt some solder on these wires. We'll come back and we'll add them to the sheet later. So let's cut some little tiny pieces of solder. And you can either lean them up against the side of this, spaced along here, but they need to be pretty small so you don't have big blobs of solder on there. You can also pick it on there if you've learned how to do that yet, and that's to pick it up like this. That's what I usually do. I'll do one way and one the other way. If you want to learn how to pick solder, I have a good video about it right there. I'll put a link for you. I think it's one of those skills that really helped me to move up a level. Okay. As well, and the other way, like I said, is to pick solder. So I'll just put these up. That looks reasonably good. So it's going to move around as soon as I flux it, so I'm going to have to readjust it, but it at least gives me an idea that I have them pretty parallel. Maybe I can get it on there with that too. Okay, I think we're probably good. If we need to, we can always go back and touch it up if we're missing any spots. That's pretty close. It's about 11 to the center of the wire. I'm going to trim off this excess on this side. I'll probably just file off the excess on the other side. So I think our next step is going to be to mark where the center piece is going to go so that we can figure out where to mount each of the circles. So maybe we should find the center and scribe a line down the middle. Alright, so we got the center point of the piece. Now let's figure out the center point this way. Right about there. So I'm going to use a little template. Where did I put that? Pretty close to that right there. That's going to be where the central point is going to go, right here. So the question I get periodically when I'm doing something like this is it easier to solder it on before you bend it or after you bend it? And when I'm just doing little thin 18 gauge wires on here, I think it'll be fine to solder it on first, because this is not very thick itself, and we shouldn't have too much problem. You could make it round first and then solder them on, although it might be harder to get them exactly positioned right. So it's kind of a trade-off. But so I think let's cut some of those 18 gauge rings. So let me find that 18 gauge wire that I had here. Here it is. And then we'll solder them down and we'll see how it goes. I did something where I had to solder things. I made kind of called it a Tetris band, where I was soldering on kind of thick pieces of flattened 14 gauge and 16 gauge and 12 gauge square. And I soldered those ones on after it was already round, because I knew that would make it really hard to bend that once it was all put on there. So you could use your jump ring cutter or saw if you want to do it with a saw. Trying to see if I can keep them in the same plane when I'm doing this too, so they don't have any waviness to them. Looks like I figured 6 rings, so I have just enough. I usually make extras in case I screw something up, which has been known to happen before. Somebody said something nice in the comments yesterday. He said something to the effect that finally somebody I can listen to that I don't get irritated with. I hope that's the case. Nobody wants to be known as irritating. You could measure those if you wanted to get really precise, but I can probably move them around slightly as we're soldering them on if I need to. I think, however, let's solder these rings closed first. That'll actually put a little bit of solder in place where we need it to be. So let's do that. Set them right on top with some solder like that. Just draw it up in there, if you'd rather do it that way. And here I am looking at what I'm doing over here and coming close to melting something over there because I wasn't paying attention. That's one of those things everybody does a few times. You're focused on something over here while you're melting something over there. Whoops. Yeah. Well, let's give that a go and see how it works. Watch them all dance when I do this. So let's make this into a band. So we grab a ring band. You're still going to find that there's going to be spots where it's harder to bend than others. That's because it's just thicker in certain spots. We're going to do our best to make that, pretty invisible. I have a slight variation between the width on this side and that side, which happens occasionally, but I think we can kind of file it out. So, but let's. I want to solder it on the inside here, and then I also want to solder it on the outside on the end of either of those wires, just to make sure we have a nice clean look there. Okay, I'm going to file a little bit of excess solder out of the inside. Okay, so let's round this back out. Okay, so I'm going to let that pickle for a few minutes so we can see what's going on a little bit better, and I'll be back. Okay, I let it pickle just for a little while so I could get it cleaned up a bit. We need to mount this right here now, but in order to do that we need to shape the bottom of it just slightly. So you basically have to create kind of a saddle shape, because it kind of on either side, straight across from each other, you have a slight curve like that. And then it tapers back into the other side and just kind of smoothly does it. So let's go do that real quick. Sorry for my messiness here. but hopefully you can see that I've made a little mark straight across from each other, 180 degrees, right through the center. And I use these knife edge abrasive silicone rubber wheels, and I usually start by making a little notch straight across from each other. And I just kind of smooth that out. And let's see how it fits our curve. That's better than I usually do on that first go around. I think that'll probably work. So I hit record, but it didn't turn on for some reason, so you missed this last little part. All I did was I spread out my third hand like this, and it gives me a little bit more of a platform. I positioned it right where I wanted it to go, fluxed it, dried the flux, and then I put some solder on the inside. And the thing that I talked about when I was doing that was that there's more mass in the band than there is in the bezel here, quite a bit more. And so we need to focus most of the heat on the band down there in order to get that up to the right temperature before that thing melts. And using a third hand like this also soaks up a lot of heat too, so it takes even longer. So a lot of focus on the bottom here. And then at the end, then I move the heat up to cover this part as well, and then it just flows and sticks down. So I had a nice seam all the way around, it looks like. So now let's go over and drill some holes. Okay, so rather than using a center punch, somebody told me this tip a while back that works pretty good, is use a little tiny ball burr to make a little divot. To get your drill bit started. That way you don't impact it and cause a dimple. Thanks, whoever told me about that. With the one where the bezel is, I might have to use a little, I use an awl here sometimes to just kind of give it a little tap. It's just a little too deep to get in there. I don't have a fancy rotary tool, so I'm just going to use my drill. See if we can get this to tighten up there. Just tighten enough, probably. And we'll do a starter hole, a smaller drill bit. Okay. So I'll do that all the way around. Then so this will do pretty well to drill out that center point, I think. Let's try that. I'm going to use a slightly smaller one, so I leave a lip on the inside of this one though. Once I've done that on all of them, I will use a ball burr just like I used on this one, probably a little bit bigger one, to clean that up on the inside, just by gently doing that until the excess is gone. Okay, so I got my ring all kind of put together and polished, and I did file the bezel a little bit shorter. I did polish the inside of the bezel. Okay, so I got it in there now, and that seems to be a pretty good height, I think. I'm pleased with how the rings came out to be about the same size as the bezel, so that's good. I do this a little differently than some people. I use the flat side of my chain nose pliers as a bezel pusher, and the rounded outer part here as a burnisher. So I'm just going to start by laying that bezel down. Using some pressure. If you need to, you can clamp this into something. When you feel like it's in there, then we can do the burnishing stage. Just rub that top edge really hard. Alright, so we got ourselves kind of a porthole ring. You can see through it. I kind of like it. I wasn't sure how this one would turn out. I visualized it in my mind, and I thought it would be okay, but I like it better than I thought, honestly. So, tell me if you think I should have done the alternating thing, or if you like this way better. I'm not sure. I'll have to make one of the other sort sometime to see how it looks, but I'm curious what your thoughts are. Alright, well, I will get some better pictures and put them at the end. Okay, well, that was the Moonstone porthole ring. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, make sure to hit the like button before you go. And I would love it if you'd take a moment and go to my main YouTube channel page. I have added a playlist there that includes all of my videos, because I realized that if you just go to videos, it only shows a select number of them. So you can go chronologically all the way back to my very crudest videos at the very beginning. So enjoy the progression, and I think you'll almost certainly find something else useful in that pile of videos, because there's over 500 now. So I do 3 per week, one on Tuesday, one on Thursday, and one on Saturday. So there's frequently new videos being uploaded, so make sure to subscribe to my channel as well. The other thing is, hit the video description down below for some important links. There's a link to my merch store, my ebooks, a link to my Patreon if you want to find out more about that really cool community, and some other links. So check it out. Thanks for watching today, and I will see you on the next one. Happy silversmithing.